Thanks to all of you who are joining us today as we look to get answer and dispel myths about all things related to COVID vaccines and the rollout. We're just a few days away from a major FDA meeting this week where the agency is expected to approve the first coronavirus vaccine for use here in the US. So what that means, who will get it, how safe is it? Those are among the many questions you guys have been asking in the last several days. I got hundreds over the weekend. We're going to try our best to get to all of them with our guest today, Dr. David Agus. Before we get started, I just want to thank all of you who have been supporting the account, subscribe to my Patreon page, donated via Venmo. With your help, we're expanding the Instagram feed to a podcast and newsletter in the near future. The goal is to continue reporting fair, verified news that sheds actual light on the headlines. And I'm grateful for all your engagement and support. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce David Agus, a doctor who's been an incredible resource throughout this pandemic. He's been running a text message account, actually reporting out details, headlines, his unique insights. We'll get you details on how to join that as well. Dr. Agus is a professor of medicine and engineering at the University of Southern California, also the founding CEO of the Ellison Institute for Transformative Medicine. He's one of the world's leading physicians and the co-founder of several pioneering personalized medicine companies. Over the past several decades, he's received acclaim for his innovations in medicine and contributions to new technology, and built an incredible reputation for the unique way he looks at the relationship between the human body, health, and disease. I could spend the hour going through your many accomplishments, Dr. Agus, but let's get to folks' questions. I want to begin with just kind of the state of play here. We'll get to the vaccine in a second, but given we're 10 months into this, record cases, record hospitalizations, the sustained death toll numbers. What are you hearing from colleagues at hospitals and medical facilities around the country, and how are you looking at things right now this December?
I think there's fear in all of our heads right now, is that we see an increase after the Thanksgiving holiday. We're seeing record numbers of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths, and those numbers are only going to go up, unfortunately. And so as we see ICUs nearing capacity, we're now canceling elective surgeries that will open many more hospital beds. Remember, a lot of ICU beds are used after surgery. After surgery, you're on anesthesia, you're on a ventilator, then a day or two, you get out of the ICU and you get better. Canceling a lot of those in order to be able to have room for when people get sick. We're seeing people letting down their guard over and over again, just saying, I'm tired of this. I can't wear a mask forever. I can't social distance forever. I have to get together with friends, and we're seeing spread of the virus. When there are this many cases, it's a lot easier to spread the virus, is the bottom line. Is that, one person affected spreads to a couple, and that keeps growing. And so that makes us very worried and sad at the same time, because lives are being lost. People are getting complications from the infection that could be lasting a lifetime. And so it really is sad in many perspectives.
With this vaccine news and the likely, approval, emergency authorization this week, what does that mean at the same time we're hearing from officials that the next few months are going to be the worst of the pandemic so far? How do we how quickly will the vaccine allow us to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel?
It's hope in a bottle, these vaccines. I mean, what's amazing is 3 different vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca Oxford, have all shown 100% blocking hospitalization and blocking serious illness from this virus. That is pretty impressive. At the same time, they're safe, right? Within, there has been no serious adverse events. And the adverse events you see, pain at the injection site, fever, chills, fatigue, all go away in a day or two. So that's a real positive. It's being rolled out in the United Kingdom as we speak. And in the United States, on Thursday, as you alluded to, there's a meeting of an advisory committee to advise the FDA, and then hopefully the FDA will take action shortly thereafter. What's amazing is, right, the trial started in March. It hasn't got better since. It's not like we're on version 2, 3, 4. So the data are what the data are. And the data, as I just said, certainly nobody thinks this will be turned down by the FDA. So in my mind, the sooner it says, let's get this out there, the sooner we can save lives. The sooner we can roll out and get the kinks out of the rollout strategy, which is going to be critical. But it will take months, many months, to be able to vaccinate most of the country, probably until May or June of next year, because of limiting amounts of supply of the vaccines. And so the more we get approved, the quicker, the more we can do this. And that's what we're all praying for.
So the Thursday meeting, my understanding, is just focused on the Pfizer vaccine. The UK looks like they're going to begin rolling out the Pfizer vaccine tomorrow. I know that it's just a matter of days, but what do we make of the UK kind of going a week ahead of us? Or do we take a different, when the FDA approves things, does it approach things differently than, say, foreign countries?
Well, remember, the advisory committee is Thursday, but the person in charge of this at the FDA said they don't have to approve it after the advisory committee. It may take weeks to months to approve it. I don't think that's going to happen, but that's what he publicly said in the last week or so. The UK does a rolling submission. So anytime you get data, you submit it and they review it as it's going. In the United States, we require the trial to be finished before you submit data. So while the trials are finished in both places, they had a head start on reviewing it, and we submitted 10,000 pages, several weeks ago. So we didn't start until it was totally finished. Obviously, not as efficient in that regard. But again, nobody is going to say is that this is not going to be adequate for approval. We've had one of the strictest regulatory agencies in the world, the MHRA in the United Kingdom, review it, and they deemed it safe. I would imagine the exact same thing is going to happen at the FDA. I just hope it happens soon.
Just want to remind folks to use the chat room function on the bottom to submit your questions. We see a number of you submitted in advance, but please, as we're going here, I want to be able to get to them as many as possible. As far as the vaccine, Doctor, I understand that, and you've talked about this a bit, this is an mRNA vaccine versus a live virus vaccine. Can you explain the difference?
Well, we're not using live virus vaccines in any of the leading candidates in the United States. So, I mean, that's a rumor out there. These are not live viruses. The Oxford, AstraZeneca, J&J are not live viruses.
Meaning I can't get COVID from the vaccine itself?
No, at all.
Okay.
So there's a new methodology that was developed over the last 6 or 7 years of taking RNA. Remember, RNA are the instructions of the body to make a protein, and injecting the RNA so that the body can then make the spike protein of COVID-19 instead of making large amounts of the COVID-19 spike protein in the other vaccines. So it promises in the future to be dramatically quicker to roll out vaccines, dramatically easier to do so. And these are really the first that could get authorizations, not approval, but authorization from a regulatory agency to be used in people. And that's very exciting. That being said, this is a new methodology. Give the instructions to make the vaccine and your body makes the protein. You make an immune response against the spike protein, and that immune response will also block the spike protein of the real virus and stop it from getting inside human cells.
So, there's been no vaccines until now for any type of disease using the mRNA technology.
Well, they've been studied, but they haven't been approved. So again, this is many years of study. So it's not like this was discovered yesterday, but there has yet to be one that's been approved by a regulatory agency.
There was a question related to RNA, just because of its similarity to DNA, and it's going around on some social networks, that the mRNA changes my DNA.
In a good way or a bad way? I'm just trying to get what the rumors are.
In a bad way. Like, I don't want this vaccine to change my DNA.
Change DNA at all. It does not increase the risk for cancer later on. This is not a trade-off of health today versus disease later at all. Those are all rumors on the internet. They are inherently incorrect and make no scientific sense, luckily.
Another thing going around that concerns people based on the how quickly this was developed. Can you talk to us about why the vaccine is available in less than a year when the quickest in history took 4 years?
So first of all, things like the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, it's been development for 9 years, right? The backbone was used for MERS, and we just took the spike protein of that out and put this spike protein in. The RNA vaccines have been in development for many years. The limiting step for many of these has been on production and manufacturing, where it's really hard to do. The clinical trials that we did with this vaccine were very similar to the clinical trials done with almost every other vaccine in history, in that the number of cases seen in the trials was similar to almost every other vaccine. So it's not unique in that regard. And then people say, well, you have to follow people for a long time to know about side effects. In every vaccine trial I know of, all of the side effects were really seen in the first weeks. They weren't seen 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later. The side effects really fall into three buckets. Too big an immune response against the virus, and that can make you get sick. Second is the immune response against the virus also hits something else in the body. And the third is the immune response against the virus can cover it up so that the immune system doesn't recognize and allow the virus to get worse than it actually would have been otherwise. All of those have been proven incorrect, with over 90,000 people vaccinated and not one serious adverse event related to the virus that hasn't been reversible. So those seem very encouraging to me. And I think the speed reflects our technology and where we are in the scheme of things now. And that really builds on decades of research and science that has enabled us to get here. This is not, willy-nilly. We just decided to do things differently.
So when it comes to, just to put a button on it, when it comes to previous vaccines, whether it's MMR, polio, Hep, et cetera, have there ever been observed long-term side effects related to any of those vaccines?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, and then one question we just had, just to put a button on mRNA, why has there not been an mRNA vaccine to date, even like last year's flu vaccine? Is it how new the technology is, or?
Yeah, it's new technology. And so, historically with new technologies, requires remarkable infrastructure and investment. And until COVID-19 came about, it was done predominantly by small biotech companies. Moderna was a very, very small biotech company. BioNTech, which is what made the Pfizer vaccine, was a very, very small biotech company in Germany. And then along comes COVID-19, and the government and pharmaceutical companies put crazy resources in to develop them, which is fantastic, but it required those crazy resources that in the absence of a market, people just weren't doing.
As far as the, at least what we know about Pfizer and Moderna, I don't know about Oxford. They're both two-shot vaccines. Can you talk to us about the difference between the two shots? Is there more dose in one versus the other? Is getting one give some level of effectiveness? There's a lot of questions coming related to the two-shot sequence.
So the notion of a two-shot sequence in a vaccine is very common, is that the first really primes the immune system, and then the second enables a much more potent immune response. So what we've seen, for example, in the elderly is they make kind of a wimpy immune response after one shot, but after the second shot, they make a dramatic response, and it's on par with a young individual. All three vaccines are two parts. Pfizer and AstraZeneca Oxford are day 1 and day 21. Moderna is day 1 and day 28. Those are the days you get the two shots. And it's not different. I mean, in both the Pfizer and the Moderna, it's the same dose in each of those. In the AstraZeneca, there was some data that a lower dose first, followed by a higher dose, equaled a more potent immune response and better protection. And so this is something that we've been doing in immunology for literally many, many decades. And this is not uncommon to get a really potent both antibody response and T cell response.
Well, bless you. Bless you. But will getting that first shot, will it give some level of effectiveness? I know that there were questions over the weekend as to why not give 40 million people one shot as opposed to 20 million people two shots to begin.
It's a great question, but what we know is that the immunity you get from one shot isn't enough to give long-lived protection to the virus. And that's first, 1-2, sequence in this case, when it's 3 or 4 weeks, has been shown to give a very potent response that can probably protect for a year or maybe several years. And so that's what we want to take now, and it makes sense. We really have to protect people from being hospitalized and from being acutely ill from the virus. And there is no data that one shot will be able to do that in large-scale population studies, unfortunately.
See, this is a question I just got in. Will you, doctor, be getting the vaccine, and which one?
I am definitely getting the vaccine. I am a frontline healthcare worker. I take care of large numbers of patients, and so I should be protected, so I can't spread the virus to others in many respects. And I will take whichever one of those three I am offered first. I really believe there's merits to each of them. The AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine is the only one that has been shown to stop asymptomatic spread of the virus. The Pfizer vaccine has a very, very potent immune response, but has some challenges with distribution and needing to be cold. The Moderna vaccine, easier to distribute than the Pfizer, but also very potent immune response. So I think all of them are powerful, and I'll take whichever one I get first. And believe me, I will take it as soon as I can, because that, a sooner day means the sooner I will be protected, and the sooner I will protect the people that I care for.
I've gotten some private messages from people, nurses, some medical professionals, who are expressing some doubts or concerns or nervousness generally about the vaccine. Have you experienced that at all? And how are you assuaging the concerns of your colleagues or anybody in anybody in the frontline worker space?
Well, listen, I'm lucky in that I get to see all of the data way before it's public of all of these vaccines. And so I'm pretty intimate with the data. And I will tell you, there's no worry at all in my mind. I literally am, I look and say, either you can get the inflammation in your lung when you get the virus and have potential long-term heart and lung issues if you don't be hospitalized or die from it, or you can get it in your arm and have none of the above. And so to me, the risk reward is dramatically in favor of getting the vaccine versus getting the virus naturally. And then getting obviously long-term immunity from the vaccine, which will not happen by getting the virus. So I really don't see the other side of the argument at the present time, but I'm lucky I get to see more of the data. As the data get announced, and I think this week you'll see a major publication, for example, on the AstraZeneca Oxford data, will do the first publication in a peer-reviewed way of the data. And I think you'll see more coming out. I think people's shoulders will come down. Unfortunately, these vaccines got made political. And much of the arguments you have out there are because people got swayed by politics. If I'm pro-vaccine, I'm supporting this administration. If I'm anti-vaccine, I'm against this administration. And obviously, none of that makes any sense at all. These are science. And the way we review these is by the merits of the science and the data, not by any political persuasion. I think it's a positive in a sense that the vaccines are being first approved in another country because it takes out politics from the equation here in the United States.
The novel nature of the mRNA, using mRNA as the technology for the vaccine, I know you expressed confidence the results so far have been great short term. What gives you the confidence that you have when you say no long-term impact, long-term concerns, especially given the new nature of mRNA specifically?
Well, the mRNA vaccines are a little bit different in that, compared to the J&J and the Oxford AstraZeneca, we do not have long-term data on this vaccine form. There is no scientific reason or any data for me to question the long-term nature of RNA vaccines, but you are right in that this is a new form where we don't have that long-term data. From other RNA vaccines in clinical trials, we have data going out several years that look fine. Fine meaning there's no long-term side effects. But this is newer compared to the others. So, one could argue that there is some more inherent risk in the RNA vaccines because of lack of long-term data. It's not data-driven, that argument, but it certainly is not an uncogent argument.
Wait, when you say from other clinical trials, that's interesting. So which, you said several years of mRNA data in clinical trials, are they specific? Which vaccines are those specific to?
Both the Moderna and the BioNTech have, prior to COVID-19, used their technology for other vaccines that are still in development.
I see. Cool. Question related to what you mentioned, which is the AstraZeneca Oxford ability to stop asymptomatic spread. This is a question I've gotten from a couple folks, which is, well, first, if I've had COVID and I have antibodies, let's begin here. If I've had COVID and I have antibodies, do I need to get the vaccine?
Damn straight is the answer, is that unfortunately the test for antibodies doesn't look for what we call neutralizing antibodies. So we don't know if you have immunity. Many, if not most of the antibodies target parts of the virus that don't block the virus. So they don't target the spike protein, blocking it from getting inside the cell. So in the absence of an assay for T cell immunity and antibody immunity, we don't know if you're immune. And what we do know is that a number of people, a very large number now, are starting to show that immunity can be short-lived. And about 60% of them, when they get the virus a second time, it could be worse than the first time. So yes, every person who got the virus needs to get the vaccine. I think the media got it a little bit wrong. And they said, when you get the vaccine, your antibody level is 1.5 times when you get the virus. But when you get the vaccine, 100% of the antibodies are neutralizing. They bind to the spike protein. When you get the virus, through just, your behavior being out there, then only a small fraction actually are neutralizing. So in reality, the antibody response is dramatically higher with the vaccine, and the T cell response we know is also dramatically higher with the vaccines compared to getting it naturally.
So if I get the vaccine, does that mean I can't get COVID? Or does it mean that I just have a better ability to fight it?
Great question. So what we know, vaccine by vaccine, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, what we know is it will block you from being hospitalized and block you from being seriously ill. And in 95% of people, approximately, it will block you from getting any symptoms related to the virus. That's a powerful argument. What we don't know is if that you may have asymptomatic virus, so you could spread it to grandma or others. Your viral level will be dramatically lower from the vaccine, but we don't know if there won't be some virus when you're asymptomatic. What we do know from the AstraZeneca vaccine is that when you're asymptomatic, you will not have virus that's detectable. And we also know it will dramatically block, obviously, 100% hospitalization and serious illness, and probably in the 80% range or so block you from being sick at all. You may get a mild cold. So about 5% of people, Moderna and Pfizer, getting a mild cold. Probably a little bit larger number, 90% with the AstraZeneca Oxford when it's medium dose, high dose, and when it's high dose, probably in the 80% range.
So that means effectively I get the vaccine, and not all my family members or friends have gotten the vaccine. I conceivably could still get COVID and pass it along to my friends and family who don't have the vaccine.
That is why we're saying that, when we do vaccinate, because we're going to decrease viral levels so dramatically in most individuals that, over several months after vaccination has hit the majority of the country, the viral numbers will go down. And so there won't be significant virus out there, and we can go back to a more normal way of life. But it's not kind of one and done. It's not like you get both shots and the next day you can go and hug grandma. That's not the case.
Do we know how long until after I get my second vaccine shot I can hug grandma?
Well, we know that you're protected with immunity normally 7 days after that second shot. But again, we don't know with the RNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, whether you can have asymptomatic spread. And if you're exposed to the virus, you can spread it to grandma. And we also don't know that you may not be in that 5% that still get some mild symptoms and have some virus. And so the vaccine will decrease virus numbers dramatically here in the country. Once the numbers are down dramatically, we can change behavior, but it's not going to be overnight.
Wait, when do you foresee that? And what does that mean for practical purposes, how long we're going to be wearing masks?
So I think that we should be able to vaccinate a good portion of the country, if not the majority, by kind of May-ish to June-ish, which will mean the virus numbers will start to go down dramatically starting in March. So the hope is, by this coming summer, we can have a different behavior, which means that when you're symptomatic, you wear masks. And so hopefully the new normal is you have a cold, you wear a mask. That's what they do in Asian countries, and it's very effective. And I hope we could do the same here. But I think we're going to have, the new normal will probably go to the summer or maybe toward the end of the summer, begin the end of the summer. It's not clear. It depends on how we roll out these vaccines.
Is there a certain percentage of the population that you're looking at as the kind of that magic number?
I really think we have to hit more than 80% of the population. And part of that takes into account that some of the people who won't be vaccinated have been exposed to the virus, and some of them will have some immunity, which will put us at a higher number. But I really think, we all need to step up here, and we need to be vaccinated, not just for ourselves, by others. We had the largest concert promoter in the country, Live Nation, who said, you can't come to one of our concerts over the next several years unless you have a certificate of immunity showing you've been vaccinated. That's a pretty bold step, and I think powerful that they made, and I applaud them.
Wait, that's been a question a lot of people have been asking, which is mandatory. How do we foresee society, especially American society, where we couldn't even do mask mandates in a number of states, mandating the vaccine?
It won't be mandatory, but you will have certain privileges if you have a vaccine, right? If you have a vaccine, your chance of spread is dramatically reduced. And so you'll be able to go to rock concerts, to get on planes, to fly to other countries. If you don't, again, it's not going to be mandatory, the vaccine, but you won't have those privileges that go with immunity.
Two major groups that folks have been asking about, pregnant women or women looking to get pregnant, or women nursing, and children. When will we know more about those two groups and the safety of them getting the vaccine?
So in the United States, and I think this is correct, we do protocols where we vaccinate adults first, right? Adults are more resilient. A child developing brain and other things, you don't want to take a risk in a child or a pregnant woman with a developing fetus. So the data in the adults showed dramatic safety. And so because of that, trials are ongoing now in children. And we should have the results of those over the next several months.
How young?
How young what?
Of the children, are we
Right.
testing on?
We're looking at kind of age 5 and 6 and above.
Okay.
And we are not at the present time doing pregnant women because, again, the developing fetus is the last year. If we can get herd immunity without involving pregnant women, which is what we've classically done with vaccine trials, which is what we do, there's no data that it would be detrimental to a pregnant woman or to a very young child, but there's no data that it will be safe. And so the hope is that the majority of the population gets vaccinated, and those we know it's safe. And then the others, we don't have to take that risk.
What about women who are looking to get pregnant in the next few months or year?
That's certainly fine. I mean, so, being vaccinated early makes all the sense in the world, and then getting pregnant afterwards makes sense. And I would certainly favor that.
Is there a sense though, if you are injecting yourself with this thing, is there a safe period to wait between getting the vaccine and then trying to get pregnant?
You're trying to connect vaccination and sex, is what you're asking me?
No, not sex. In terms of safety of like, if you're going to get the vaccine and then potentially you're looking to have a child in the next couple of months, is there a certain period of time you would wait?
Yeah, I would probably wait 2 months from the vaccine. I mean, from the first shot. Makes sense to me. By then you're over any side effects from the vaccine and have antibody levels that will protect you. I mean, what we worry about more is getting sick or the virus while you're pregnant. Obviously has significant ramifications, and we've seen some issues in women who have gotten the virus while pregnant.
What sorts of issues?
They've been ill, they've delivered early, and there've been some complications in those women. And so it's certainly not a high risk group. There haven't been many, but there certainly have been some.
And then as far as I got a question from people who are nursing. Would you recommend waiting until after you're done nursing to get the vaccine?
There's no data in that regard. And certainly I don't think it would be a risk if you got the vaccine while you were nursing. I don't think there's any evidence of that case. I wouldn't nurse in the 48 to 72 hours after you got the vaccine. But other than that, I don't think there's a real risk, although there's no data to that. That's just my gut.
And then you talked about achieving the level that we need to in the population, minus pregnant women and children. When do you foresee a time when it'll be safe, that will have sufficient results among children to begin vaccinating them?
Well, children, as you know, are much less likely to be hospitalized and have complications from the virus and carry what we think is a lower viral load. So they're toward the end of the list and hierarchy of when we vaccinate anyway. But I think over the next several months, we'll have more and more data on the safety in children. And so certainly by the time their number comes up, for lack of a better expression, we'll have that data. There's some data now with some of the vaccines showing safety in children, and there'll be a lot more over the next several months.
There's a debate over the weekend. They were talking about kind of what the next step. So obviously we're going to vaccinate medical personnel first. And then the question was, in the next tranche of vaccines that we get, should we focus on the elderly and people in retirement homes, and try to prevent death, or essential workers and try to prevent spread? Is that a choice we have to make? And how do you view that?
Well, the first tranche includes frontline healthcare workers and people in long-term care facilities. So they're both grouped together. And I think both of those are obviously critical. People who are risking their life to help others certainly makes sense. And other frontline workers, I would think, makes sense to be next. Or people with significant medical conditions who we know, if they get the virus, can be hospitalized and very ill. The federal government, the ACIP, is going to make recommendations. There's another meeting coming this weekend. But every state has the right to make its own decisions regarding to the hierarchy of how it's distributed.
Have you ever seen this level of concern about a vaccine as you've been kind of following this throughout your career? And what do you attribute that to?
Well, I mean, the vaccine got politicized, unfortunately. And so the emotions on here are not data-driven or not science. It's really emotion. I mean, it's, belief systems other than science. And so have we seen this with vaccines? Certainly around the world, there have been concerns with vaccines, most of them unfounded, most of them based on data that weren't real, right? There was a study published that vaccines could be related to autism, and it turns out that the data were fabricated and totally incorrect. And that caused a whole movement in that regard. And so these are emotional topics, and I respect that and understand that. I've had death threats. So me as a doc has had death threats from people because of vaccines, and it's kind of scary. And so this is a very, very charged issue, and I understand that. But to get normative behavior change, you need leadership. In the field of health and medicine and vaccines, we have not had leadership of note recently. And so I think that's a problem. That's part of the reason also masks have been politicized and others, is that we really haven't had that leadership around science. And that's a failing on the medical community's fault. That's a failing on the politics part. That's a failing on CEOs of companies' fault. I think leadership needs to come from every direction, not just one place. And I think we failed in that regard.
Has the damage of the past 10 months, is it permanent, or and how do you I hope not, in answering my own question, but what would you suggest policymakers and medical professionals do going forward to kind of regain that trust?
It was difficult because there wasn't positive data from the vaccines. And so without real data to talk about, it was hard to be an advocate because we never had the data. Now that we have parts of the data, we're going to get a lot more over the next week or two. You're going to see people step up pretty aggressively, like they're starting to do now, and talk about the vaccines in a positive sense. You've had many of the former presidents say, I will take a vaccine live on TV or some media to show that it's safe, and I believe in that. And I think that's what we need, are people to step up there and to educate. And what's interesting and I think important is that every culture needs to be educated differently. We all respond to different leaders. We respond to different levels of education. We all have different preconceived notions about the vaccines. And I think because of that, the language has to be slightly different to each group. And we haven't done that historically well. My hope is we'll start to do that now.
Question related to the subject we were talking about earlier, the antibodies, and whether you can be a carrier of COVID. So this person had COVID, or appears to have COVID, but at least has antibodies now. Can they still asymptomatically spread COVID to family and friends even though they have antibodies?
Yes, and they can get it themselves. Because again, those antibodies are not neutralizing antibodies. They're what we call generic antibodies to the virus, that some of them can just hide the virus. They don't necessarily block the virus from doing its thing, which is getting into human cells and multiplying. So yes, the current antibody tests that are out there really have almost no utility and don't make a lot of sense. And so you saw early on, right, in that when we would take antibodies from patients who were sick and give them to other patients, it didn't work. That was a big controversy, remember, with the FDA. When we used that, plasma from one patient and give it to another, it didn't work. Again, because generic antibodies don't work well in terms of protecting from the virus with this particular virus.
So I know that was a big storyline in the spring and summer. People who had COVID donating. Plasma has no effectiveness whatsoever.
Right now it doesn't. And so now there's a new class of therapy called monoclonal antibodies, which they actually took the bone marrow of patients who had COVID-19, and they found the B cells that made the antibodies that bound to the tip of the spike protein that blocked it from getting in the cells, and then they grew that up. They actually fused the B cell with a cancer cell, made lots of them, and made that into a drug. Eli Lilly and Regeneron have come out with them, and there's several more in the pipeline that'll come out soon. And these are antibodies that work. They're the neutralizing antibodies. Generic ones, unfortunately, don't have the benefit.
So that means if I have COVID, I have antibodies, I can donate my bone marrow to a treatment that is effective.
Yeah, but that's to make these, but we already have enough of those. That was early. And predominantly at Vanderbilt University, they had a whole cohort of people who stepped up and did that. And now those are in late stage of development. It took 6 months of development to make sure they were safe, and they worked, and they are. 2 of them have received emergency use authorization from the FDA. Several more in the pipeline that will come out soon.
So the head of Warp Speed, Monka Slawi, over the weekend said that he believes, and he didn't provide any data in the interview to back this up, but he believes that these vaccines could be effective for 2 to 3 years. Do you share that optimism? And is there data or historical data related to other vaccines that could back that up?
Well, I mean, we can have no data because we've only vaccinated people for a maximum of kind of 6 to 7 months. And so we know that the immune responses are potent and strong at that point. If we extrapolate from how the change from, the beginning till 6 months later is, yes, it looks like this will be several years of protection. But we certainly don't know that. And right now it's just conjecture. We don't know what level of immunity is required to prevent you from getting the virus. And this is a critical point that's not talked about. So what you're going to see in January is what we call a challenge study done in the United Kingdom. What they're going to do is take people who've previously had the virus and say, hey, with this level of antibody and this level of T cells, if they give you the virus again, do you get it or not? And they're going to start to define what level of immunity is required to protect you from the virus. That's a critical step in answering the question of how long will immunity last? Because again, I don't know what level is required to protect. And so those challenge studies will happen in January. We'll get the results over the next month or two, and then we can much better answer that question. But it's really important to know is, I don't know what level of immunity is required to protect you.
And what's so interesting is the thing you mentioned earlier, and I'm curious about when we'll know this. So I get the vaccine. We don't know with a couple of the vaccines whether I can still asymptomatically spread the virus. Which, you know, you brought up the example of next summer, you know, that people who are symptomatic will wear masks. Is there a sense by next summer whether we'll know that like everyone will still have to wear masks because we still don't know the data on asymptomatic spread of people who have the vaccine?
I don't want to mislead. My gut is there will not be asymptomatic spread with any of these vaccines. That's my gut.
Okay. Okay.
I don't have that to prove it yet. But I certainly think, if we can make an analogy with the immune responses we're seeing with the AstraZeneca Oxford, and similarly with the RNA vaccines, that it's going to be the same. You know, just we're a scientist. We want that definitive proof. But my gut is it will be the same. You know, the hard part here is, and I can't overemphasize this enough, is that the American public is watching the sausage being made in science for the first time, which is what creates all these indecisions and people questioning things. Is normally just we say, hey, it's definitive and here's what we have. Right now, for the first time, you're watching the sausage being made.
And how do you feel it's going? I mean, watching that process for the first time.
You know, with the advent of social media, with you know, media outlets jumping on everything, you know, whether it's real or not, it's been really difficult. You know, there's this new methodology of you don't wait for a paper to be peer reviewed, just put it up on the web. And many of them out there just aren't real. And so, you know, it's been very difficult. And so without the leadership where, you know, hey, here's a trusted voice. If he or she says it's correct, then we have to go forward. Then, you know, everybody takes what they want. And you can find anything on the internet right now. You can find any belief system, any rumor. Oh my gosh, look, it says here that this does this.
Yeah.
And you jump on it. And that's what's difficult.
I actually, along those lines, I got two questions from folks saying, I saw something on Facebook that said that related to someone out of Europe said that the vaccine potentially creates infertility for women.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to laugh at that because obviously it's a very serious topic, but there's no data. It makes zero sense. They said it was a head of R&D for a pharmaceutical company. It turns out this person wasn't that. It didn't even say anything of the kind. Again, just get exaggerated because, you know, people want something to back up their belief system. And unfortunately, it causes a lot of mistrust and distrust. You know, I think when you see the vaccines rolling out and you see the responses, you know, for the first time, really, we're going to enable people to get a text every day after their vaccine. It's going to say, how do you feel? Did you miss work? Did you have a fever? All of those. And we're going to actually get real world evidence for how people are responding and side effects from the vaccine, which I think what they're going to be shocked with is, the day after the vaccine, you may get some fever and chills and you may feel pretty crappy, but a day or two later, you're going to feel totally normal. And that's your immune response, right? The bigger your immune response is, the worse you feel for a day or so. And that's common. We saw that after the shingles vaccine and many others, people felt down for a day or two. Tylenol, it helps you feel dramatically better during that period. But yes, that's the immune response. But again, I'd rather that inflammation in my arm and feel a little down for a day than having that inflammation in my lung or my heart and having potential lifelong complications from it.
And just to back that up, because we talked about in the beginning, when you get that response and you start to feel down the dumps for a couple of days after getting the vaccine, that's not COVID creating that reaction.
No, it's your body's immune response to the spike protein, which is not alive and is not active, but you're making an immune response to something. And part of the immune response is your body saying, oh, I'm going to use all my energy to fight this. It builds up this powerful immune response, and that's what you feel. And that immune response stays around and protects you when the real virus comes.
So we've talked a bit about misinformation here. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You can't spread the virus during that period. So even though you feel bad, you don't have live virus, you can't spread it to others.
We talked about fighting misinformation. How does the average person do that?
You need to look at the source where the information is from. And obviously there's some more trustable sources now. Not every source is 100% accurate, but certainly the bigger sources, the networks, the major periodicals are going to be much more accurate than anything else. And I think you have to question it and really say, is this a real study? Was it published? And unfortunately, those are the questions we all have to ask. And listen, I go on CBS, several times a week because it's part of my obligation to go out there and educate people and try to be, a beacon of data in this time where there's all kinds of rumors out there and to try to shoot them down. I do that text service you allude to try to, again, get real data out there. And so this isn't my opinion, and I'll say when it is my opinion, but most of the time it's the data. And we just want to get rid of things that are incorrect and put the real stuff out there so people can make informed decisions.
And how can people join your text service to get the latest information from you?
They could text a number. Do you have that number? I don't know if
I will put it in, but they can go to your website. It's on the top of your website.
Yeah, I believe. Go to Twitter or my Instagram, and the number is there. So if you go to my Twitter or my Instagram, you'll see that number. And it's different than Twitter or Instagram, where whenever you put something up, people can attack it from all different sides. This is an opt-in service where I will text you a video message normally, or written message of data and what's going on. And so it is normally much more friendly. So I'm much more apt to put things there that are breaking and are really in depth, because I don't want to be attacked on Twitter and Facebook. And so, and then you can answer questions to me, and text back questions, and we'll answer them directly to you. And I think that's powerful to be able to have that discourse back and forth. First of all, it tells me what people are thinking about, what they're talking about. And it enables me to helpfully make people much more calm regarding the information.
I just put it in the thread, and I'll copy and paste it everywhere, but it's 310-299-9322. Question that I just got in, saying the timeline, Dr. Agus, you gave of things starting to feel normal by the summer assumes most of this country gets on board with the vaccine. In reality, given the concerns people have about the willingness to vaccinate, what do you think a realistic timeline is? Or do you think that we'll be able to convince the number needed to do this?
Listen, I'm an optimist. I really am. And I think when people start to see the tolerability of this, the lack of side effects in the data, I don't think that they are going to resist getting the vaccine when they see the potential downside. An amazing thing happened a couple of weeks ago. You have, one would argue, the best college football quarterback in the country got COVID-19. He finished his 2-week quarantine on a Thursday, and he couldn't play the following Saturday because they had to do cardiac MRI and make sure he didn't have inflammation of the heart. Asymptomatic people, most people will have inflammation of the lung and a significant number of inflammation of the heart. And those most have lasting ramifications. So I do think people are going to realize that the safety of the vaccine trumps dramatically getting the virus, which is what we all care about. And I hope everyone steps up to help others. There's a significant fraction of people in this country, probably 5 to 7%, that cannot get a vaccine. They're immune suppressed, they're getting treatment, they have autoimmune diseases, they're a child, very young, they're a pregnant woman, and we want to protect them too. So we all need to step up to help others. And this is a new, era of our country of thinking as one community. And I think it's critical.
You discussed early on in the spring, I think, for a bit, how kind of surprised you were about how unprepared this country was in our initial response. What other lessons have you taken away from these past 9 months that we can use moving forward through this pandemic and to deal with future health crises?
Early on, I still remember, right? I walked into Davos, Switzerland, to the World Economic Forum, and somebody thrust an iPhone in my face with a doctor from China who was walking through the hallways showing me what was going on. And most of your audience won't understand this, but there used to be a TV show called MASH, where there was chaos when there was a bombing and people came into this portable emergency room, operating room, and it looked the same. Literally people lying all over the place. Every day for the next few days in Davos, we held meetings of health officials from around the globe, and we watched him. And he died a week later. He was the whistleblower. He was an ophthalmologist in China. So early on, we got to see the ravages of this. And, we didn't know for the first month and a half, 2 months, that there was asymptomatic spread. We just didn't know. And so because of that, we weren't telling everybody to wear a mask. As soon as we figured that out, we told people wear a mask. So you saw the recommendations changed, and that was really difficult as that played out before the American people and really the world. You saw us fail in the testing early on in the United States. For the first 6 weeks, we did not have really testing. And we still don't have adequate testing in much parts of the country. We don't have adequate reporting where we know exactly where cases are, what's happening. We don't have adequate contact tracing. Our clinical trials took a long time to get set up and a long time to execute. We enabled there to be a free market so that there were thousands of clinical trials, all of whom competing with each other instead of doing the best each time. We shut down most labs in the country. And I could go on. And I think all of those will be learning for the future. And so I and many other doctors and scientists across the globe are really getting together on a regular basis, trying to figure out ways to develop best practices, whether it be to treat COVID-19 now, to get the vaccines out there now, and then especially for health security in the future. And I think you're going to see a number of initiatives announced very shortly about how we're going to make sure that we have a surveillance program to block these things early in the future so this doesn't happen again. We have a vaccine program, a therapeutics program, so we're not scrambling at the last minute like we are now.
There's a question here about concerns about ensuring the vaccine gets to communities of color, gets to poorer communities across America. Any sense on how state government, the federal government is preparing to ensure that those hardest hit communities aren't overlooked?
There's no question we need to really focus on those communities. What's interesting is that we thought we would be able to distribute the vaccine, predominantly through hospitals and then secondarily through pharmacies, CVS, Walgreens, et cetera. And what happened is that we had this crazy outbreak of COVID-19 across the country. And so basically hospitals are getting full, the parking lots are full. We can't have thousands of people going through a hospital now getting vaccinated. So the vaccination strategy in many respects had to change midstream here and focus on these areas. I know I called up the state and said, hey, I've got a parking lot that's covered that we can switch over to a vaccination program for the state if you want it. I think many others are stepping up there too. And we have to make sure we're doing in the areas that need it, not just the areas that have these facilities. And I think most states, and I'm not familiar with how every state is doing it, but the ones I am familiar with, there really are major programs to make sure the neighborhoods that need it the most are going to get it. And at the same time, talking to leaderships, whether it be in churches, whether it be at companies, whether it be community leaders, so they can step up and really show the leadership to enable their community to be vaccinated.
Do you have any concern right now about the equipment necessary for this mass vaccination effort, whether it's gloves, syringes, et cetera?
Early on, Operation Warp Speed, we did do some things right. We did at-risk manufacturing. We started to manufacture the vaccines, and it's still an issue, the numbers of vaccines, but believe me, we're a lot better off than we would have been had we not done.
Oh. I think we muted you by accident. No, go ahead. Start again.
No, you didn't like what I said. I know it was controversial. I know you just wanted to say, damn it. No, so early on, getting needles. There's certain needles that are required for vaccination so that you can click and they can be covered so that people won't stick themselves after they vaccinate. There's certain vials that are required for vaccination. There's certain, syringes that are used. And so supplies were built of all of them. And it's going to be a challenge now, certainly to distribute them. The first vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine has to be stored at minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit. They develop boxes that will keep it at such temperature for many days. And then it could be in a refrigerator for up to 24 hours. So each of these boxes has at least 1,000 vaccines. So you need to do it in places where you're going to do at least 1,000 vaccines when you thaw this box. The Moderna vaccine could be refrigerated for probably 4 weeks. So a little bit easier than that. The Oxford AstraZeneca is always refrigerated, so much easier supply chain there. And so there are going to be kinks in the beginning, right? We're going to get some things wrong. Many places are setting up kind of mobile RVs to be able to do these vaccinations and training people to do that. CVS and Walgreens have stepped up big time to be able to do it. FedEx is doing the distribution initially for Pfizer. And FedEx is a pretty good distribution system if you think about it. So a lot of players here, it's been played out and practiced over the last couple of weeks, and it's going to roll out hopefully soon. Again, we will have kinks, but that doesn't mean the system isn't working. It just means we get a little bit better, and we will get better doing this.
And we should feel better about the vaccine plan than the testing rollout of the spring.
I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. I still don't love the fact that we're leaving it to states to make their own decisions. I think there should have been a uniform one across the country. Would have made more sense to me. But I think that there really has been a lot more planning in the distribution, and the military is involved. And the military is not going to say they're giving you your shot, but they're helping with the distribution. and they're pretty good at supply chain issues. So my gut is not going to be without issues, but it will be pretty good.
Any observing kind of where Biden stands on this and the people that he's started to bring onto his team, any sense of what potentially could change as far as the vaccine distribution as of January 21st?
You know, I mean, I've certainly been I was part of the Biden Cancer Initiative for the last several years. So I have a deep love and respect for President-elect Biden. And I think the team he brought on is impressive in many regards. I think now he just announced today that Jeff Zients is going to lead the kind of the COVID czar, if you will. And I think Jeff is a tried and true tested business person, as well as he worked on rolling out the Affordable Care Act and others, and he's done an amazing job in those. And I think he's impressive. I think they're going to keep the distribution system as we have now, and hopefully scale manufacturing, getting it out there. I think you're going to have a very data-driven, thoughtful approach come third week in January, which I'm excited about.
One thing that's come up a few times, and my fiance and I discuss it all the time, which is there's been such a great effort about, COVID happened, the whole world got together, funded it, lab, science, everybody focused on the vaccine. But what we found out through COVID is that some of the issues, some of the people who are most vulnerable to it have these underlying conditions, obesity, diabetes, et cetera, make those conditions worse. To what extent and how is it possible to create an initiative with the same level of urgency about these long-term health issues that tend to, make all these other conditions worse?
Well, I mean, we in our country have not really focused on prevention. We say, listen, you have a right to smoke, you have a right to eat what you want, to sit all day, and then we as a society, we pay for the healthcare ramifications of your behavior. And I think we're going to step up here and start to really push on the prevention side and on the responsibility and healthcare side. And I think it's fantastic. And I think there have been many communities that have been underserved on the prevention side. And hopefully this will bring new focus in there. The bottom line is when you do that, it helps the entire country. Everybody benefits when you lessen the burden on the healthcare system, whether it be the individual, their family, their community, or the healthcare system as a whole. We have runaway costs in healthcare now, and we in the medical community are incentivized to treat rather than prevent. And so I think we're going to see that transition happen. I think we're going to see a data, one of the things that COVID has done, and also very positive, it's made us realize that our data has been siloed, and we haven't used data for improvement. And I think what's going to happen is a liberation in the data in a privacy protected way so that we can practice healthcare better, so we can practice prevention better, so we can understand in each individual in a personalized way what needs to be done.
Can you translate that data, the thing you just mentioned about data transparency? Like what would that mean going forward?
What that would mean is that your healthcare data will be anonymized and will be used so that if there's another patient with similar characteristics of yours, we can look at your outcome and do better with that patient. Every day you search on Google, your search today is better than yesterday. They look at where people searched in a privacy protected way, and they were able to improve their search. I want to do the same thing in healthcare, and I think we can. There are
I have been told by doctors, though, never to Google my condition.
Well, that's a whole different story, but you're right that everything on the internet looks the same. I just meant just Google searches in general, not Google Health. But we're going to get much better at using data to drive healthcare. And so what people don't realize, the dirty secret is there's not one decision for any condition. There's several decisions based on your value system. And as I, as a physician, can present the data on each of those decisions to you in the right way, you have right understanding, you're going to make the right decision on your value system, and you're going to have the best outcome for you. And that's what we want. An amazing study came out, last year showing that if you had ovarian cancer and you were on a beta blocker, an inexpensive drug for blood pressure, you live 4 years longer. We would have never found that in the biology lab. It was found from big data. And so all of a sudden, there are these nuances and these understandings we're going to get from data, again, in a privacy protected way, which we can do to enable better healthcare.
So until now, it was, whether you were lucky that the doctor you saw might have seen a patient like you in the past. Now that doctor has access to national or international data in case he hasn't seen a case like this before.
So you hit it, is that medicine is really pattern recognition. When I see this pattern, I know if I do X or Y, the outcome is going to be Z. And going forward, with data, we can actually start to improve that across the country. So you're not going to probably make the great docs better, but you'll make the good docs great and start to get equal care across the country by enabling technology to do this. It's done it in almost every other area. Healthcare has been the last frontier. If you went and tried to get a loan at the bank, we'd ask you for all your financial records, everything, and you give it without questioning it, and you get that loan. If I say I want to use your data in healthcare to make other people's lives better and to be able to treat disease better, most people have said no historically. Well, now we're going to be able to do it in a remarkably privacy protected way, so there is no risk. It's still going to be your choice and your option, but I hope now people are going to step up and be a part of this.
All incredible advice, incredible reason for optimism. In the meantime, though, as we close here, Doctor, we're heading into these next few weeks, months, holidays, before we are all able to obtain the vaccine. What's your advice to folks through December, January, February?
This virus is spread by droplets. Every time I speak or I breathe, I exhale droplets. Droplets mainly fall to the ground from gravity, but if enough virus particles and enough droplets spread to you, you get sick. If it's a small number, your innate immune system can handle it. So you need a significant interaction to get this virus from somebody else. If you wear a mask and they wear a mask, the chance of it spreading is decreased dramatically. You couple that with social distancing, and there's no spread of the virus. So if we all do the right thing, and we know what it is, over the next several months, we're going to have many fewer cases, and this pandemic is going to end sooner, and it'll be a much better outcome for many because they're going to be alive. And so we all care about grandma, we all care about that elderly uncle, and we all care about our neighbor. We have to step up and do the right thing for ourselves and for them.
Thank you so much. And just to put a final button on it, because you mentioned grandma a few times, when do you hope we can hug grandma without a mask?
I really believe the beginning of the summer, we're going to be able to hug grandma. I told, my mother the same. Unfortunately, I don't have my grandmothers, but I do have my mother, and hopefully I can hug her then.
Well, we all share your optimism, and I hope we'll be able to talk again in the spring as we know more about this vaccine rollout. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Dr.